They will Google symptoms at midnight before they'll text a friend who's a nurse. They will cry in the car, in the parking lot, for exactly 4 minutes, then fix their face and walk into the meeting. They will take on one more thing, and then one more thing after that, quietly building a structure that is absolutely going to collapse. And still, somehow, the thought of saying I need help feels more dangerous than the collapse itself. This isn't stubbornness. This isn't pride. This is something older and more specific than that. And if you recognize yourself in any of those 3 sentences, you're not broken. You're responding exactly the way your nervous system learned to respond. The question is, when did asking for help become the most terrifying option in the room? Here's what nobody tells you about people who can't ask for help. It's almost never about independence. It's about what happened the last time they needed someone and that person wasn't there. Maybe it was a parent who was physically present but emotionally unreachable. Maybe it was a household where vulnerability was treated as weakness, or worse, as inconvenience. Maybe it was just the slow accumulation of small moments. Reaching out, not being caught, learning to stop reaching. This is what therapists now call hyperindependence. And it's one of the most widely misread trauma responses in the clinical literature. It looks like strength. It functions like armor. But underneath it is a nervous system that made a very rational calculation. The cost of needing someone and not being met is unbearable. So it stopped needing. Or rather, it learned to need in secret, quietly, at 2 a.m. when nobody's watching. The body still keeps the score, as psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk describes it. You can intellectually understand that the people in your life now are different. You can know, logically, that your best friend would drop everything if you called. And still, something older than logic holds the phone down. That's not weakness. That's a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. This is where things take a turn. Because the past is only half the story. There's a present tense economy running quietly in the background of every decision not to ask. Psychologists call it the shame productivity loop. At some point, you absorb the belief that your value to the people around you is contingent on your ability to function, to deliver, to be the person who doesn't add to the pile. So asking for help doesn't just feel vulnerable. It feels like a transaction going the wrong direction. Like you're withdrawing from an account you're not sure has anything in it. You'll cancel plans before you'll admit you're struggling. You'll stay up 3 hours later than you should, rather than send a text that says, "I'm overwhelmed. Can you help?" Not because you don't care about honesty, because somewhere in your architecture, your right to take up space in someone else's concern feels conditional, earned, and you're not sure you've earned it today. That's not arrogance. That's a brain that learned to tie worthiness to productivity, to confuse being capable with being lovable, to mistake self-sufficiency for safety. Now here's the part that'll mess with you a little. The reason most people don't ask for help isn't actually fear of burdening others. It's the terror of losing control. Because if you do everything yourself, the logistics, the planning, the fixing, you control the outcome. The moment you let someone else in, you've introduced a variable you can't account for. And for a nervous system that learned early that unpredictability is dangerous, that variable isn't just inconvenient, it's existential. But here's the cost nobody calculates. Psychologists call it cognitive overload. And it's brutal. Every task you refuse to delegate, every problem you insist on carrying alone, every moment you spend micromanaging your own survival consumes prefrontal cortex resources that could be used for literally anything else. Creativity, connection, actual thinking. Your obsession with control is a tax on your intelligence. You're spending 90% of your mental bandwidth just to prove you don't need anyone, leaving almost nothing left to actually live. That's not efficiency. That's an exhausted micromanager running on fumes and calling it independence. Control isn't a character flaw. Control is a surrogate for the safety they never got to take for granted. But the price of that safety is everything it was supposed to protect. And the irony is almost unbearable, because the very mechanism designed to protect you from abandonment is the one quietly engineering it. When you never let people help, they eventually stop offering. Not out of malice, because you've taught them you don't need it. And then you're more alone than ever, which confirms the original belief. You could only ever really count on yourself. The loop closes, the armor does its job, and the person inside it gets a little smaller every year. When you ask for help and receive it, both people's brains release oxytocin, the neurochemical at the core of human bonding. Not just yours, theirs too. Being needed, being trusted with someone's vulnerability, is chemically rewarding. It deepens attachment. It creates the kind of connection that 1,000 pleasant dinners cannot manufacture. When you refuse help, you aren't just protecting yourself. You're starving your relationships of the very chemical that creates bonding. You're keeping everyone around you on a connection diet, never letting them feel the reward of being needed by you. You think you're sparing them. You're actually keeping them at arm's length from something they would have treasured. There's also a cognitive distortion buried in all of this. When you imagine asking for help, you picture the other person as burdened, inconvenienced, maybe even resentful. But research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people consistently overestimate how much their requests burden others and underestimate how willing those people are to help. We are not uniquely inconvenient. We are just convinced that we are. There's a version of this that feels like strength. You do everything yourself. You need no one. You never ask. And for a while that reads as capability. Then, at some point, the same behavior comes back around, and it doesn't feel like strength anymore. It feels like a room you've been locked in so long you forgot there was a door. What gets lost in all of this is intimacy. Not the kind where you show up for people. The terrifying, necessary kind, where you let people show up for you. Asking for help isn't a surrender. It's an upgrade. It's the realization that the all-by-myself strategy has reached its ceiling. The loneliness you're living in isn't fate. It's a choice, made quietly, out of fear, repeated so many times it started to feel like personality. And if you want to go further in your relationships, your work, your actual inner life, you have to be brave enough, just once, to be a burden. Still here, still carrying it alone, which is the only way they know how. Still, somehow, finding reasons to keep going even when the going stopped making sense a while back. If this named something you've never quite had language for, subscribe. We go deep on the quiet architecture of human behavior here, the patterns that run us before we realize we're running them. Leave a comment if this resonated. I read them, and for God's sake, let someone in once in a while.